Good evening. It is so great to see you all here with us tonight at the DMA. I'm Nicole Myers, Chief Curatorial and Research Officer, and also Senior Curator of European Art, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the opening of Saints, Sinners, Lovers, and Fools, 300 Years of Flemish Masterworks. As the title suggests, this incredible exhibition takes visitors on a 300-year journey through the ups and downs and twists and turns of the historical region of Flanders, and you're going to learn more about this tonight. But as it was captured by the artists of the time, organized roughly chronologically into 6 sections, the exhibition explores timeless themes spanning medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque art that are as relevant today as they were then. Themes like the role played by religion and public and private life, human folly, global discovery and innovations, and political uncertainty. And as you'll soon see, if you haven't already, the show is as sumptuous and beautiful as it is thought-provoking and poignant. Saints, Sinners, Lovers, and Fools was co-organized by the Denver Art Museum and the Phoebus Foundation, and we are fortunate to be joined this evening by Dr. Katharina Van Cauteren, the Chief of Staff at the Phoebus Foundation, and this evening's esteemed speaker. Katharina studied art history at Leuven University, earning her doctorate in 2010 with a thesis on the Brussels painter Hendrik de Klerk and his role as court propagandist for Archduke Albert and the Infanta Isabella. Katharina worked at the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp as collections researcher and exhibition curator from 2012 to 2014, at which time she joined the Phoebus Foundation as its chief of staff. She has curated all of the Foundation's major exhibitions, including The Birth of Capitalism, The Golden Age of Flanders, which was in 2016, Lace is More. She has a knack for titles, by the way, if you haven't noticed this. Lace is More, which was mounted in 2019, and The Bold and the Beautiful, which was back in 2020. Most recently, Katharina is the originating curator of the present exhibition that we're celebrating tonight. And it's actually the first exhibition that the Phoebus Foundation is showing here in the United States, so we are absolutely honored to be the second venue and to help the Phoebus Foundation's mission to really spread their collection and Flemish masterworks around the globe. The exhibition debuted at the Denver Art Museum last fall, and it will officially open this weekend at the DMA, so you all are very lucky that you're getting this early sneak peek of the exhibition. I heard Katharina speak when I was in Denver at the opening and was really blown away. It's a rare talent to have a scholar who can present a really complicated stories, this 300 years of history here, in a way that's engaging, funny, and with a fresh voice, I keep saying this to you, that we don't often find when we talk about older historic periods of art. So it's very hard to find, so I was absolutely thrilled when she accepted my invitation to come and speak here to us tonight, really giving this keynote lecture that's going to outline all the major themes, the artists, some of the great masterworks that you're going to discover in the exhibition. I could keep going on and on about Katharina, but I would rather you see for yourself. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming her to the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. There was high pressure. So, well, it's such a pleasure to see all of you here and to be here and to be able to show our exhibition here at the fantastic DMA. So I will be guiding you through the show, but first of all, let me explain one or two things about the Phoebus Foundation, of which I am, like Nikki explained, the so-called chief of staff, which normal people would, well, call a director. But I guess we're not normal people. So, what we do, we're based in Antwerp and we collect art, but I guess you already figured that out. And we have a very diverse collection. It actually all started with Coptic textiles, which basically mean textiles dating back to 1,000 years before Jesus Christ until 1,000 years after Jesus Christ, mainly found in Egypt. We also have a collection of historic lace. And if you're wondering what the thing in the middle is, it's a belt that was worn by the Empress Elizabeth of Austria, so basically Sissy. On the right, a set for a newborn, so hey, imagine being that baby. We also have a collection of Belgian art from the late 19th and early 20th century, so basically from Impressionism, Expressionism, Symbolism, and Surrealism. And I specifically included this painting by René Magritte, since I noticed that you have quite a few Magrittes here in the collection as well. We also have a collection of Vice-Regal art from Latin America. We have modern art from Latin America, so 20th century. We have Cobra art from the 1950s from Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. I just keep going. And we have a collection of port heritage on which we're really trying to build a community around of volunteers trying to restore things and to figure out how all these impressive tools worked. And, well, we also have a collection of old masters, mainly from Flanders, and I will get back to these, of course. What we do with this collection, we first and foremost take care of these pieces. So that means we try to store them in the most ideal circumstances. We conserve and restore them. And, well, I'm very proud to say that all the pieces that you can see in the show here, they went through our conservation studio. So I had a few people asking me yesterday, like, is it normal that all the colors are this bright? Well, yes, it is. That's mainly because we removed all of the dull yellowish varnish, and then you can see the real original colors again. What else do we... Oh, that was fast. We also study these objects. So I could show you a picture of me or someone of my team, well, reading a book or sitting in an archive, but that's not very sexy. So I included Sven, who's the head of our conservation studio. But we also do a lot of material and technical research, which basically means, like, for instance, using visual techniques like X-rays or macro XRFs to look at what's underneath the actual paint layers. And I'll give you a beautiful example of that later on. All the results of this very scientific research we tend to publish, and sometimes we do that in very, can I say that, boring scientific publications. But what I like to do most is to publish them in, like, these cool books to tell the stories in a very profound yet fun and accessible way. Because, well, I think we often tend to have this sort of respect for especially old masters because, well, whoa, they were created this long time ago. But, well, they were actually, well, contemporary back in the day, so let's just have fun with them and play around with them. Well, all this material at the moment is mainly in our storage, but, well, I figured it was time to create our own museum, so we built this little tower in the city center of Antwerp. And, well, actually, it is a little tower if you compare it to what you guys have here in the US. But it was actually the first skyscraper built in Europe back in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So it's basically our own Empire State Building. See? I got the proof. It really defines the skyline of Antwerp. But it's still a tiny bit lower than the cathedral, because, well, yeah, in life you have to know your place. And we have big plans with it, because at this moment we're still removing the asbestos inside, but we decided on Daniel Liebeskind as our architect, and, well, this was kind of his vision. We'll see how that ends up. But, well, just to say that in a few years' time, we'll be having our own museum in the center of Antwerp. So write it down in your agenda. We're guessing like 5 years' time. I hope to see you all there. But before we've reached that point, it gives us the time to, well, play around with the collection and find exciting partners to create exhibitions. So I'll just show you a few examples of these. This one was about, well, Flemish Impressionism. Nikki said I have a knack for titles, but I also like these exuberant scenographies. Apparently, this one was about the 7 deadly sins. This is the room dedicated to gluttony, and now I feel a bit sorry that I didn't include the room dedicated to lust. Sorry for that. This was the exhibition dedicated to lace. And then this one was about Jacob Jordaens. You'll hear me mentioning his name later on again, but he was one of the richest artists in 17th century Antwerp, and we're very proud that we are the owners of the ceiling paintings that he created for his own house. So here we had an exhibition in the Netherlands where we reinstalled them, but we also added a mirror on the floor, so wherever you were looking, you saw paintings by Jordaens. There was no escape. But I saved the best for last, of course. With this life-changing question, are you a saint, a sinner, a lover, or a fool? And earlier today, I decided that I'm a sinner, but only because, well, this matched with the dress. Of course, deep down below, I'm a saint, you can tell. So this exhibition takes you to the other side of the ocean, to the tiny region which we call Flanders. So it's basically the north of Belgium. It's a tiny region. It's sort of the size of Maryland, something like that. But back in the late medieval period, I tend to think of it as the Dallas of its time, the place where money and power and science and innovation and creativity met. It was one of the most urbanized regions north of the Alps. And honestly, I mean, you have to imagine, a city like Ghent was bigger than Paris at the time, and Bruges had more inhabitants than London. So that does say something, doesn't it? And of course, there's Antwerp. Antwerp was the center of the universe. And in Antwerp, people still think it is. But of course, in Dallas, you guys know better. So, well, that's just to invite you all to come to Antwerp again. I'm not sponsored by Flanders Tourism or anything. Anyway, in this region, something very exciting happens. There's this huge economic boom, and people become entrepreneurs, which is something very new at the time, and it's something that will define everything that we'll be seeing here today. It makes these cities the richest cities in, well, literally the whole Western world at the time. And also, just before I forget, you'll notice that sometimes I'll say Flanders, sometimes I might say the southern Netherlands or the southern, oh, here we go again, the southern Low Countries. And yesterday someone asked me, like, is Flemish the same as Dutch? That's like asking someone from the United States, is an American the same as a Canadian? It's a bit different. You sort of speak the same language, but they're Canadian. So, well, the Dutch think we're very cozy and cute, but they're Dutch. So, well, no, it's not the same. Even though a big part of our history is, well, we share it. And I'll get back to that later, but basically in the middle of the 16th century, so right in the middle of this exhibition, we had a civil war and the North became independent. So they became the present-day Netherlands. We still remained part of the Spanish Empire. And in the 19th century, we became Belgium. And so the northern part speaks Flemish Dutch. It's the same. Okay, here we go again. I'll come to Antwerp. Yay. So, but back to the 15th century, at the time when people were still, well, they became entrepreneurs and everything, and they started earning money, lots of money. So what do you do with money? You want to spend it. Well, I would. I'm a woman. So what do you do? What do you buy? I would say shoes, but. You could also say paintings. But in the 15th century, people first and foremost wanted to invest their money in their eternal soul. Because you have to imagine, you were still like, there was no discussion about it, no doubt about it. You were a Catholic Christian, that's it. And as a Catholic Christian, you believed that life in the here and now was only temporary. Well, it still is. But if you were a medieval Christian, you also assumed that at a certain moment, could be, well, this evening, could be tomorrow, could be in 1,000 years' time, there would be the last judgment. And then God would decide whether you had been a good boy or a good girl, and then you could go to heaven. But now for the bad news. Most of us are sinners. So we will all burn in hell. And the odds are against us because, well, don't quote me on this, but I believe that according to medieval theologians, there are like 10 out of 100,000 people who would actually go to heaven. And all the rest of us, well, this is what awaits you, just so you know. And it all sounds a bit funny today, but for a 15th century person, this was reality. Like, this is what would happen after this life, and it would last forever and ever and ever. So that's worth investing in, no? If you can, like, increase your chances to go to heaven, even if it's just a little bit. So what can you do to do that? You can pray, of course. Or you can take a walk in nature. Because, well, God has created everything, from the highest mountain to the tiniest buttercup. So what you need to do as a devout Christian is you need to study every single detail of nature, of the divine creation, to get a bit of insight in the big divine plan. I tend to compare it to being in love. Well, sir, I think you're a very interesting person, but if I would be in love with you, I would think that even your earlobes were worth, like, studying. Maybe they are. So, in any case, that's what you should do all the time. But you're an entrepreneur. You can't study earlobes all the time. You have to earn some money. So what do? You buy a painting. That's important because it has a huge influence, this new kind of approach. In the early medieval period, art was much more symbolic. And it's not like artists couldn't do any better. I mean, the sculptor who created these virgins with child, he knew what a woman looked like, but it was like convention to use this symbolic code, because God understood. I tend to compare it to Egyptian art. It's written in some kind of visual code, and the gods understood. They knew that people are not walking like an Egyptian. But it's some kind of, well, yeah, it's a way of communicating with the divine. Even up until the 13th century, that's the kind of art you see. 14th century, this one is 15th century, by the way. And then this happens. Because if you have to study every single detail of creation, well, as an artist, it's worth painting every single detail of creation. Only then a painting becomes this practical tool to make sure that you, as a buyer, as the owner of this painting, can use it to study nature while you're sitting on your sofa. Netflix wasn't invented yet. So if you look at this tiny little detail, is this dandelion? I mean, it always somehow gives me goosebumps. It's like it's tiny, it's not even flowering, it's not even in bloom, but it's part of the grand divine plan. So the first room in the exhibition is filled with all these details, and you can really see all the flowers over there. We can identify them, actually. I think I have another example. Oh, well, back to you. See, I have the detail over here. Like there's strawberries, there's columbines, I don't know what else. I'm not a botanical person at this moment, but you just have to believe me. If you're a botanist, you can identify them. So, but once you understand that, you also understand that you need to take time when you're in the exhibition to, well, look at every single detail, because that's what these were created for. But to paint all of that, you also need a new kind of technique, and that's where innovation comes in. Because, well, in the past, artists used to paint with tempera, which is a combination of egg, could be the yolk, could be the white, with pigment. Now artists use oil paint, so they combine oil with pigment, and that allows for all these amazing details to be painted, but it also allows for these translucent layers to be painted on top of each other. And so a painting almost seems to like be filled with light. It glows from the inside out. The divine is literally captured in there. And just look at, once again, at the details, at the light, at all the pearls and the gems in here. It's like God is everywhere. So, I'm gonna go this way. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah. Something else that I should tell you. Is that, I compared it with this one, 14th century painting. Because, well, you see that the Virgin here is still, she's rather absent. She's not someone who's approachable. You don't go there and say, "Hi, Mummy." You go to her and you say, "Hi, Mummy," because she's a mother. These paintings also want to make sure that you empathize with them. They want to, well, the divine becomes human, actually. Because, well, if you're supposed to feel what the Virgin felt when she was holding the baby Jesus, and look at how he's cuddling her chin. It's cute, isn't it? It's cute today, and it was cute back in the early 16th century in this case. But it's also sad, and these paintings want you to weep together with the saints presented here. Because, of course, Christ dies, and then you have his mother there holding the body of her dead son. And there's the angel, Mary Magdalene behind, and she's showing you almost how you should feel, how you should behave. You should get the goosebumps, you should feel the tears welling up in your eyes. Because if you feel the way that these persons felt, then you're one step closer to heaven. That's all fair. Oh, yes. Oh. Well, that's one last example from the first room to show you how you should feel. You should become one of the wise men exploring creation, exploring reality, and then maybe, if you're very lucky, you will find the Christ child. That's all very well. But you can't pray and meditate or even ramble through nature all the time. So somewhere in the 15th century, some smartass comes up with a brilliant idea. They think like, what if we replace the actual person with his or her portrait? Then the portrait can do the heavy lifting. They can do the praying for you. From morning to evening, from day to night, even after you're dead, you're still sitting there praying for your eternal soul. Brilliant. There is one condition, though. It's the fact that these portraits should really resemble you. There is no photoshopping here. Every gray hair, every wrinkle has to be there, because we don't want any confusion, do we? We don't want God to think at the last judgment, like, was it really you? Or was it your sister? Was it maybe your neighbor? No. So they're really almost harsh in some cases, and we can actually still see the kind of diseases some people had, because they're so exact, so precise. And at first, it's still all very religious, and it should remind you of the fact that you're all gonna die. But very soon, the nobility realizes that you can also use portraits for your status and prestige. This is a very sweet little prince, and the way that he's been portrayed is to prove that he's a legitimate heir. And he's wearing red because, well, they had all these dress codes at the time, and red was a color only for the highest nobility. But if it's only for the highest nobility, then our rich citizens also want it. So, well, they start making portraits of themselves just because they can now, because they have the money, because they want to show off. And that doesn't mean that they're not, I mean, this is such a touching portrait. It's one of the first double portraits of a couple ever made. And they're playing this game of, well, it looks like backgammon. It's actually trick-track, which was a predecessor. And I don't know the exact rules, but someone who does told me that they're not playing against each other. They're playing as partners, and she's warning him because, well, apparently his position doesn't look very good. So she's basically telling him, honey, don't do this. Listen to me and it will all be fine. So see how little has changed. And there is definitely something paradisical going on. Just look at the parrot over here. So he's referring to paradise, and their union will be fruitful in every possible sense, so hence the plate of fruit. It's a very literal reference. And they're dressed in their most expensive clothes. Like, they're both wearing black, because black was the most expensive color to make, because it was so time-consuming. And there's all these furs, and there's also the red sleeves. Because, well, like I said, only the nobility could wear red, but sleeves were a bit of a gray zone, so she gets away with them anyway. There's this lady also, well, dressed in black with the nice white to like show off. First of all, it shows that she doesn't need to work very hard, because you and I know how hard it is to keep white clean, and they didn't have like these fancy laundry products just yet. But it also like exaggerates the black. And if you look at, this one first. I'll go back to the other ones. She's really showing off, because the white stresses the fact that, well, the black is so black, and you don't see it here, but you have to look at the painting in the show, and then you'll see all these details over there in the black. And that's really quite exceptional, because, well, black paint tends to darken through the ages. And then you certainly had some kind of, well, eager conservator who was like trying to make it a bit lighter again and then washing away all of the detail. Well, that hasn't happened here. And the white is all lace. And lace at the time was more expensive than diamonds. It does say something, doesn't it? But, well, being fashionable is hard. If you're wearing this kind of ruff, you can't have your hair down, so you have to put it up. It's very stiff. It must have been so uncomfortable, you have no idea. But it does give you the opportunity to wear some nice jewelry. Any excuse will do. So look at her ear. It's like wrapped to keep this headband into place. I'm quickly going back, just because I can, to show you this little portrait, because it's been painted by a female artist, which is quite rare. I mean, it's not like the ladies couldn't paint or weren't allowed to. It's more like people had these more gender-defined roles. So normally you had the husband who was the painter, and the wife who took care of the shop or took the paintings to the market. Probably also did the accountancy, did the laundry, took care of the children. But in this case, she also did paint. So here we have this very, nice-looking young lady, and she was definitely a saint, because the quote in Latin just stresses the fact that she was a good girl. She'll definitely go to heaven. All right. So, like I said, you have to study nature to get some insight into the divine. And that's also where science starts to develop. Because, well, if you're studying nature and earlobes and whatnot, you could just as well write down all of your new knowledge. And that's very new, because up until the 15th century, scientists still based themselves on antique knowledge. So things that had been written over 1,000 years ago. And now, for the first time, they start to look for themselves and describe what they are seeing. And this book in the show is by Remberto Doens, and he lived in a city named Mechelen. He just basically went outside of his house, started collecting plants, and before he knew it, he had 600 different specimens. So he described them, published them, and he's basically the father of present-day botanics. In this case, also a book which is in the show, but, well, I shouldn't say that because everything that I show now is in the show. This book is by Vesalius, who started, well, dissecting people. That's what happens when you study earlobes. And he's basically the father of modern medicine. We also have the first atlas ever produced. And, well, there were so many new inventions and discoveries that they dedicated an entire print series to it, and I have a few examples from it. This is the invention of oil paint. We also have the discovery of America. It's, of course, very cliché here, but there was also this paradisical vibe going on. People felt like they had discovered earthly paradise. Well, they had in a certain sense. Look around you. It's the invention of the printing press, invention of windmills, useful. Invention of glasses, even more useful. And this is my personal favorite. This is the invention of a machine to polish your armor. Because, well, if you're a knight, you want to shine like, well, like a nicely polished sports car. And then artists also, well, start to discover antiquity in a new sense. And I always tend to love that Italian artists came to the north because that's how they learned how to work with oil paint. But then, well, they started doing interesting things with it. They started studying antiquity and antique sculptures, and an artist from the north went down to the south to also study antiquity. So the bodies you see here, well, I'll just break the news to you. That's not how normal people look on a normal day, maybe on a very, very, very good day. So they're based on antique sculptures. Both paintings here were made for the highest possible nobility. The one on the right-hand side was painted by Bartholomew Spranger, born and bred in Antwerp, but he became the court painter of the Emperor Rudolf II. And this painting might have hung in Rudolf's bedroom. Nice things to look at when you're in your bedroom. And then the other one, well, of course, that's my personal favorite in the entire show because it was painted by Hendrik de Klerk. And Nikki told you probably don't remember, but it was painted by Hendrik de Klerk, on whom I wrote my PhD. So hey, totally unbiased here. So all these new discoveries and inventions can make you too full of yourself. That's the risk, you know? Before you know it, you think you know everything and you feel like you've become, well, a bit like God. So that's where these paintings come in. It's a very unique genre for 16th century Flanders. It's all these fools trying to, well, be a mirror to all of us. Because in the end, you and me we're all just fools. So the image we see in the mirror, well, it's not pretty, is it? But don't worry, this guy had his finger on his mouth, and there is this Flemish quote next to him. It says, "Mondeken toe, I'll shut my mouth." You and me, we're just fools, but don't worry, he won't tell anyone. There's also this fool, and she did live for real. Her name is Elizabeth, and she was a court fool. And we have all these details about her life, but the thing that gets to me most is the way she looks at us. It's as if she's wondering, like, am I the fool, or are you? There's a few other paintings here that also show us how not to behave. These two, of course, well, they're greedy, and you're not supposed to be greedy in this life. And this one is a man behaving like a woman. So, well, this is very politically incorrect. Just be warned, I didn't paint it. But this guy is counting groats. And is this kind of grain, and it's also referring to, well, a saying, and if you were a groat counter, it meant that you were nagging and moaning. And it was something that these 16th century people considered something very female. Yay. So this guy, he's behaving like a woman. He's a sissy. And it's, once again, it's a bad example. You're not supposed to moan or groan or behave like a woman. And, well, I disagree with the latter, but I do agree with the former. So you're not supposed to moan and groan, not if you're a man, not if you're a lady either. Then this one says it all. It's the trade of fools. And you see how all these little fools are everywhere here. So there is these shiploads arriving, the little fools are being weighted and distributed over here, they're being traded up here, but on their way, they infect everyone with their folly. So people are gambling, they're dancing and drinking. There is a woman sitting on top of a man. And this one is a nun, and she has run away from the monastery, and, well, now she's grabbing this guy's dagger. But be warned, in the back, the house is on fire, so they will all burn in hell. Just think of that the next time you go for the dagger. This is also where it goes wrong. So, if nuns are doing things they're not supposed to do, if these monks and nuns are also selling, what's it called? Indulgency, sorry. Lost the word for a second. Then it's definitely time to ask a few serious questions, which is exactly what this guy does. And okay, I'll tell you, it's the only painting in my entire presentation which is not in show. It's a portrait of Luther, and now you'll all come to me and tell me, why isn't this painting in the show? Well, just because I forgot. But he's here now, and yeah, okay. This will have to do. In any case, Luther starts asking these questions like, what's happening in the monasteries? This isn't okay. And that's where the real problems start. Because you have to realize that at the time, and, well, he was just here, this is the Emperor Charles V, and the general idea was that the nobility ruled thanks to God himself. So it was God himself who placed the emperor, who placed rulers on their throne. And here you have the adoration of the three wise men, with here, one of them is a portrait of the Emperor Frederick III, and this is his son, it's Maximilian. So it doesn't become more literal than this. They have their power thanks to God. But if you start asking these annoying religious questions about which god and how did that work? Then suddenly the throne starts to wobble. So that what started as a religious discussion, a theological discussion, suddenly becomes this political conflict, becomes 80 years of war. So you have to imagine that. It's like 80 years of Ukraine. It's horrible. It must have been horrible. It becomes a theme in art because it was so present, it was everywhere. In this case, this is one of the rare positive stories. Here, the peasants are winning. They're like, it's these nasty Spaniards, and they're getting rid of them. Well, but in reality, that's not what happened. Because this is the so-called Leeuw Belgicus, the Belgian lion, and it's a map. If you look at it, you have to use a bit of your imagination, but, well, there we have them, the Dutch, together with present-day Belgium. And if you look at the lion, yay, I did my homework, I tried combining them. You see that if you use your imagination, the two of them combined are the Belgian lion in Latin. But then there's a civil war, and they fall apart. So the north becomes, like I said earlier, independent. The south remains part of the Spanish world empire. And so the Belgian lion, and I put them in this direction just so you could like sort of orient yourself, becomes the Dutch lion, a boo. So we, Flanders, remain under Spanish rule. And the Spanish king sends his daughter, the Infanta Isabella, to the north together with her husband, Archduke Albert. Yes, these two are husband and wife. Because, well, when he dies, she takes up the habit of the Poor Clares. She never makes it to the monastery because her brother asks her to stay on as governess, etc., etc. But before we're at that point, they had a lot of fun together. Look at them sitting in their little sleigh. And they do realize that they have a big problem here. So their territory is at war, even though they're there, even there is this 12 years peace treaty. So they start using art to try and reaffirm themselves as the legitimate rulers of, well, the southern Netherlands, the southern Low Countries. And they start using art for propaganda, first and foremost, to show off, like, we're the legitimate rulers, like I said. The painting on the left-hand side, so Archduke Albert, was painted by Rubens. And just look at him. I mean, he's a bit elderly here. He has gray hair on his temples. And there is this feeling of a bit of melancholy. Albert had gout, just like Rubens, by the way. And he has this feeling that he won't live that long anymore. Hence, the red curtain behind him, it almost evokes this setting sun. And if you look at it from up close, you'll notice that the brushstrokes are really very free. It's almost impressionism. It's got such bravura. At the same time, it was also very practical. Rubens was a practical man. Because, well, if you have to paint every single tiny detail, like the paintings we saw at the beginning, then you use a lot of time and a lot of material. Whereas if you can just use a few brushstrokes to evoke everything, it's much faster and it uses way less paint. So since you're an entrepreneur, painter, that's the way to go. Isabella, on the other hand, was painted by Anthony van Dyck. And, well, Van Dyck is a bit more refined. You have to see the actual painting, but then you get the feeling that she's slightly looking down on you. Because after all, she's the Archduchess, isn't she? And there's also this feeling of what we call with an Italian word sprezzatura. So it has this kind of nonchalance. It's as if she's just walking there, and you can almost hear her dress rustle a little bit, and they just push the button on the camera. This painting is also by Van Dyck, because the archdukes don't only use art to to show off how important they are, but they also use it to show the rightfulness of the Catholic faith. So these large-scale altarpieces, they're meant to almost overpower you, to convince you of the fact that the Catholic Church is the only right one. So if you see the Saint Sebastian, he's supposed to almost make you well up, because it's such a sad story, and look at how dramatically he's lying there, and it's overpowering, or it's just very cute. And in this case, it's very domestic. This was painted by Jacob Jordaens, who was, after Rubens died, Jordaens becomes the richest painter in Antwerp. And secretly, he's a Lutheran. Very sneaky of him, because he just keeps on painting for the Catholic Church. But he does use his wife as a model for the Virgin Mary, and his baby Jacob as a model for the Christ child. And look at how Joseph is actually inviting us to join them, come closer, come join us, pray with us, be with us. We're all just like you. The divine has become human. But sometimes the divine really needs to stay divine. So that's why they build these very theatrical new churches. This is the Jesuit church in Antwerp. It still exists. It still looks very similar, except for one thing. Well, more than one, actually. You see all these ceiling paintings here, and they were all made by Rubens. But in the 18th century, there was this big fire, and they were all lost. Yeah, say that again, please. Yeah. But there is good news too. Because Rubens made sketches before they created the actual paintings. And we're very proud that we have one of the sketches here in the show. All the more because you have to think that, like I said, a painter like Rubens was a real entrepreneur. That meant he had a studio with lots of assistants. And how did it work? It was like the master, the creative genius who made the sketch, and the assistants who had to realize them on large scale, and then Rubens came in again and, he added some final touches, and that was it. That's how he earned the money. But this sketch is fully made by Rubens himself. So that's about as close as you come to the master. This is another example of a painting by Rubens, and it's also one by himself, because it's a very early example. At this moment, he was still in Italy, where he studied antiquity, and then he came back to the north because he figured that he could earn more money there. And he was right. Like I said, he died as one of the richest people in Antwerp. That's because he didn't use a lot of paint. Well, here we have Albert again, another highlight in the show. And this one, yes, because the artists, they also start, dramatizing daily life. In this case, this couple, they have plans, don't they? And here we see a self-portrait of Jacob Jordaens himself. And he's portrayed himself a bit as the fool here. He's making the music, he's trying to impress this girl. Actually, it's a bit funny, because he once again used someone from his family, his own daughter, by the way, to model here as the lady who needed to be impressed. But this one is my favorite in the room dedicated to the Baroque, because it was painted by Michaelina Wautier, and her name maybe tells it to you guys, because she was a lady. So In this room full of testosterone, she is the female touch. And it's a bit of a cliche, but she specialized in children. So these two are fighting over an egg. It's all to do with this proverb, and well, the main message is like, there is something for everybody's taste. Basically, don't fight over an egg, which sounds like sound advice. And there is, of course, the bad guy here dressed in black, the good guy dressed in white. Well, but just look at the way that she catches their little personalities with the little like shades under his eye and the soft hair. She really was good at this, and well, so thought the Archduke, because she became a court painter. Well done, Michaelina. Oh, and I'm also showing you this, and this is also not in the exhibition, but it's very exciting for us to announce that we will be collaborating with the DMA on, on a very exciting conservation project, because this painting is probably a self-portrait by Michaelina Van Cauteren, and thanks to the DMA, we will be able to restore it. So that's why the colors here are still very dull. That brings us to the last room in the exhibition. And here you see a couple in the middle of their collection. And this is really how a collection was supposed to hang in 17th century Antwerp. We call this, with a German term for some reason, a Kunstkammer, an art room, which is also why you will get this kind of feeling that the last room is pretty full. There's all sorts of things to be seen and explored. Because that's also something new and unique, because for the first time in Western history, artists in Antwerp start working for the free market. Before that, you were probably a member of the nobility, or you were a clergyman, you had an idea, you went to an artist, you told him what you wanted, and he painted it for you on commission. Now, artists start working on spec, like I said, for the free market. But if you're working for the free market, you need to diversify, because, well, the Mr. wants a landscape, but the Mrs. maybe wants some flowers against the wall. And then it becomes more and more specific. You get winter landscapes, and you get garlands of flowers, and so it goes on and on and on. So we have all sorts of cool examples in the last room, like, for instance, this painting by Daniel Segers. He was a Jesuit himself, so he wasn't allowed to sell any paintings. You had to be given one as a present. So, of course, suddenly everybody wanted one. Good marketing strategy. Or there is this still life by Ozias Beert, which looks all nice and appealing at first sight until you see these ugly insects crawling all over the place. Because there is still this moral message involved, like, well, you're nice and fruity today, but beware, tomorrow you will be rotten. We're very cheerful people. Well, to stay with the theme, this one is also there. Also in the last room, well, I would say it's a portrait. Well, maybe it was a portrait at some point. It's once again a reminder that maybe you're looking all nice and pretty now, but give it a few years. Wait until the bird picks your berry. And there you are with your nice pearls and flowers. Still, we're all just fools. You have these funny paintings with monkeys showing us how silly we all are. And you have these ingenious creations made not by one but by two artists. Because, well, by now you've become a collector, you've become a connoisseur. You've learned how to discern different hands. I tend to compare it to, well, having a good wine cellar. You taste the wine, You don't do that by yourself, you do that together with friends. You discuss the taste. Ooh, it's a Chateau Petrus from I don't know when, I don't know anything about wine. I only know things about paintings. So I can tell you that this one was painted by 2 different artists, because then you had more like conversation pieces. Once again, it was easy to create, actually rather cheap, but it was very expensive to buy one. It was very chic to have one. And then you could hang them in your art room. And if you were very proud of your collection, you could have it immortalized. Or you could cheat. In this case, well, we used to think that this couple had quite a collection. But then in our conservation studio, they came to me and they told me, like, Katharina, something is a bit off with this painting. There's something wrong. So we took X-ray images of it and we discovered that the happy couple originally was not there. There were 5 gentlemen. You see 1 here, 2, 3, 4, and I have the 5th one over here, who are hidden beneath the paint layers. So this painting is dated 1652, but somewhere around 1675, this couple acquired it somehow. They were like, oh, these 5 gentlemen, no one will ever know. Well, for 3 centuries, they got away with it. So I'm basically at the end of my story. I just wanted to add that what happened in Flanders in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries paved the way for, well, basically everything that would come after. Rubens was the main inspiration for Delacroix and Géricault in France, who would create romanticism, romantic art. And the way that these Flemish artists dealt with light and with color would also be even some kind of, well, I'm looking at Nikki now, like, she's making these faces like, Katharina, what are you gonna say now? And I know it's a long and winding road and I'm taking the shortcut here, but in the end, this will lead to Impressionism. And I also like to compare artists to directors. And if Rubens would be alive today, I think he would be like Steven Spielberg, creating these like things that overwhelm you. But where Spielberg needs like 2 hours to do that, Rubens or Van Dyck need only like 2 seconds, only 1 image to do that. But even today, directors are looking at these paintings and getting their inspiration from them. And I here show you a screenshot from Game of Thrones. So, well, I think these artists are still very relevant today. And in the end, for me, it's, well, most people tend to go to a museum and wonder, like, if they see painting, like, do I like this? Do I think this is beautiful? And it's all very well if you do. But for me, it's always a matter of why does a painting look the way it looks? Why did an artist pick this particular subject or paint in this particular style? And if you start asking these questions, it becomes a much wider story. It becomes a story about politics and economics and religion and science and technology and innovation and so on and so on. This one painting becomes this gateway to the past. And if you scratch just a little deeper, it becomes a story about status and prestige, about friendship and love for a child, about fear of death. In the end, if you know how to look, all of these paintings, they're about what it means to be human. They are about you and me. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Katharina Van Cauteren. I hope I said that
Just like
correctly.
Katharina.
Thank you all so much for joining us. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, we hope that you'll come back to see us, and please enjoy the rest of the reception if there's still a little bit of time. Thank you.